Sirocco Productions presents the Sirocco Historical Doll Series. Included in the Sirocco Historical Doll Series are Scarlet Dolls, Dion Quintuplet Dolls, and The Coronation Story. Scarlet Dolls, a 72-minute program, traces the evolution of the Scarlett O'Hara dolls by Madame Alexander. It also features many Gone with the Wind collectibles. Dion Quintuplet Dolls chronicles the early years of Canada's 5 famous sisters and the quintuplet dolls made by Madame Alexander. This 84-minute documentary contains rare news clips and photographs of the young Quints. The Coronation Story, a 90-minute video, covers the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, plus the many collectibles and dolls that commemorate her elevation to the British throne. For more information, call Sirocco Productions at area code 804-461-8987.
These books, the Collector's Encyclopedia of Dolls and the Collector's Book of Doll Clothes, offer the novice and professional doll enthusiast a treasure chest of documented information and historical insight. My name is Lee Lively. I'd like to welcome you to Dolls of the Golden Age. With me now are the authors of those incredible books, Dorothy Coleman and her daughter Evelyn Jane Coleman. Ladies, I want to thank you for being a part of this new video and bringing some of your collection to share with us today.
It's our pleasure to be here this afternoon with you.
I've previewed most of the dolls and artifacts that our viewers are about to see, and I have to tell you that this is a remarkable video full of doll history. Dorothy, I know a lot of basic facts can be found in your 2 encyclopedias, and yet you seem to be most excited about the dolls of the Golden Age.
And it is truly a golden age for dolls, because it is the age in which the greatest number of dolls were shown at the international exhibitions. It was a worldwide enthusiasm for dolls. Also, it is an age when most of the dolls were playthings for children, and they were beginning to understand the importance of childhood.
Why is the period 1880 to 1915 called the Golden Age of Dolls?
Because the dolls were created in the image of their period, and also the dolls are made of porcelain, and the clothing reflects the impressionistic paintings that one is likely to see and love.
What were the primary countries that manufactured dolls during the period 1880 to 1915?
We designate a doll as being French or German. Actually, parts of them were made in Germany, parts of them were made in France. In Paris, the clothes were often mostly made, and parts of them were made in the United States, too.
Were dolls of this period intended to be play dolls or bric-a-brac for decorating the Victorian parlor?
They were definitely play dolls, and they were educational for the children. They were enjoyed by the children as playthings. They were not only educational as far as the doll was concerned, but they also helped to educate the children to make the clothes, which they would eventually do when they grew up.
Tell me, did the term undressed dolls mean a nude doll to the Victorians, Dorothy?
No. An undressed doll always wore what they called a chemise. In Germany, it was called a shirt, but it was a fancy garment that was put on, a very cheaply made garment with lots of lace and lots of ribbons to attract eyes and to attract the sale.
Oh, it was a sales piece.
It was a sales piece, yes.
Interesting. Did that stay on the doll after the doll was dressed?
Sometimes it did. Oftentimes people put their dress that they perhaps had made at home or that they had bought over the chemise. And it's always a great thrill when you can find the chemise still on the doll underneath the dress, because with the dress over it, it would have been preserved.
And the chemise styles changed in the years, so with the chemise one can date the doll, because unlike the actual dresses of the doll, you can't precisely say that that is in this catalog or that catalog, but with the chemises you can.
Well, let's take this Simon and Halbig doll. Was this originally a play doll, or was it a collector's piece?
This was originally a play doll, and I have friends who had similar dolls that were play dolls in the 1880s.
In the 1880s. Well, I think this is the doll we'll begin our story with, the Simon and Halbig doll. Dolls like this extremely rare Simon and Halbig are prized by collectors wherever they can be found. But initially, they had a very different purpose: to supply comfort and educational companionship to children. These play dolls mirrored either the world the child was entering or a world of imagination. At the end of the 19th century, dolls were produced in both traditional and innovative forms. They reflected both a changing world and reactions to those changes, changes accelerated by more rapid transportation, resulting first from the improved efficiency of steam engines in ships and trains, and later by the combustion engine for automobiles. Social and political upheavals, many arising from colonial expansion, brought conflicts like the Boer War, the Spanish-American War, as well as the First World War into the nursery in the form of miniaturized military personnel. That splendid little war, a term applied by the Harvard historian Frank Friedel to describe the Spanish-American War in 1898, fed American chauvinism. Events like Admiral John Dewey's victory at Manila Bay, Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders charging up San Juan Hill, the sinking of the battleship Maine, and the war slogan, "Remember the Maine," fueled the demand for military dolls, including this little Remember the Maine sailor. In 1902, the ongoing Boer War in South Africa generated this Boer War soldier. Whatever social or political statements were made explicit through dolls in the Golden Age, there were also artistic and aesthetic considerations. Changing aesthetic concepts paraded through the faces and garments of the dolls. And side by side with dolls dressed in current European fashions were dolls dressed in historical costumes depicting the fashions of the previous 3 centuries. The contemporary drawings of the British artist Kate Greenaway, who reinterpreted the Regency styles of the early 19th century, put many little mothers of the 1890s and their doll playmates in look-alike high-waisted outfits. But external features alone do not tell the full story. Technological advances in the manufacturing of dolls were also occurring. In France, prior to the 1890s, most bisque heads were made like the procedure for making pie crusts. The malleable clay mixture was rolled into thin sheets and then hand-pressed into the crevices of the casting mold. Then the soft shape called greenware was baked into hard ceramic in large ovens called kilns. The press technique invariably gave a rough, uneven, and consequently more fragile finished product. Porcelain parts manufactured by the pressing technique were distinguished by the lack of indication of a rim and an uneven interior surface, which on occasion could be very rough. By thinning the clay paste to a liquid consistency called slip, pouring it into and filling the mold, allowing a coat of slip to adhere to the mold, and then pouring out the residue before firing or hardening the parts in the kilns, smoother finished porcelain products were achieved. The pouring process, used initially by German doll manufacturers but later practiced globally, was both quicker and more labor efficient. It produced a smooth product of near uniform thickness. Mechanical advances impacted on doll making. Soon after Thomas Edison first captured his recitation of Mary Had a Little Lamb on his new invention phonograph, the Scientific American magazine, in its April 1890 issue, was promoting talking dolls that used Edison's invention to recite nursery rhymes. For the child, their doll, whether the latest commercial creation, bedecked in ribbons and laces, or a home-dressed model, was the catalyst around which fantasies and learning experiences evolved. Children of the early 1890s, such as Anstice McDuffie of Massachusetts, with her extended doll family, epitomized both a childhood dream of dolls and a manufacturer's dream customer. For manufacturers, dolls were an economic reality, a commodity from which significant sums like pots full of gold were to be made. Prizes of gold also dictated to the child and to the manufacturer what dolls would be produced. These gold medals were real pieces of gold, and they were awarded at exhibitions after much deliberation. By their actions, the jurors at the exhibitions were casting ballots for playthings that would shape the emotional and educational development of at least a generation. These exhibitions, great and small, showcased the best, sometimes the gaudiest, and the newest creations in Toyland. For example, this selection of Jumeau dolls displayed at the Great Paris Exposition of 1900. Beginning in 1842, the name Jumeau had maintained an unrivaled position both in the nursery and in the receipt of exhibition awards. By the start of the Golden Age, the Jumeau concern was an integrated manufacturer that produced entire dolls in its Montreuil-sous-Bois factory near Paris. All aspects of production were performed there, starting with the clay mixture to mold the heads and other body parts, firing the bisque heads in the factory's kilns, cutting in the eye sockets, inserting the eyes, fabricating the bodies, painting the legs, highlighting the hands, attaching the limbs to the body trunks, making a variety of wigs, styling or curling the wigs, assembling complete dolls, adding shoes from the Jumeau shoemakers, and also the chemises or fashionable dresses for presentation to the public. Jumeau was to change the direction of doll making with one of its entries in the Great Paris Universelle Exposition of 1878. In this World's Fair, Émile Jumeau, son of the firm's founder, displayed an innovative type of doll, a bisque doll's head strung to a composition body which had wooden ball joints. This new doll reflected in a stylized manner the physical characteristics of a 4-year-old child. The commission for sculpting the head had been given to Albert Ernest Carrier-Belleuse, chief artist of the world-renowned Sèvres porcelain factory near Paris. According to Émile Jumeau, the creation of this innovative doll had actually begun in 1874. The initial releases, like this 1877 example, were probably sold exclusively at the Louvre department store in Paris as Bébé Incassable, or Unbreakable Baby. The body was hard to destroy, but the bisque head shattered easily. Soon, these Jumeau ball-jointed dolls were identified in their native France simply as bébé or bébés. The term bébé quickly became the generic description for such dolls globally, as Jumeaus were distributed around the world. For instance, this particular bébé was initially purchased in the John Wanamaker department store, the Grand Depot in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In addition, the words bébé and Jumeau were often inseparable. Throughout the golden age of dolls, bébés or bébés incassables or bébés Jumeau appeared in retail catalogs, especially those aimed at the year-end holiday season. From these wish books, which were then a new form of advertising, children and adults could select gifts. The eyes of the child receiving this bébé Jumeau would have been as wide and deep as those of the doll. In studying this size 8 or 18½ bébé Jumeau, it should be pointed out that the clothes accurately reflect late Victorian taste in color, texture, and design. The unique feature of this doll's wardrobe was the inscription her hat carries, Madame Lebrun, Paris. The shoes were marked E. Jumeau, Medal d'Or, 1878, Paris. The 1878 date referred to the first gold medal awarded to the Jumeau firm for their bébés, and not to the year in which the doll was actually made. The popularity of these child dolls was so phenomenal that the inventor Émile Jumeau and his successors claimed to have made over 50 million in the next 4 decades. It's my understanding that 5 million Jumeau dolls were sold in the 1910s. Were they play dolls or art dolls for collectors?
They were definitely play dolls. And although they produced 5 million, or allegedly produced 5 million, few of them survived because they were play dolls, and the little folks didn't always take the best care of them.
And with the porcelain heads, they often got damaged and then discarded.
Jumeau made millions of dolls during the golden age of dolls. Were the faces basically the same?
No, they were not. They changed through the period as the changing attitudes towards beauty did. Also, with the greater production, they also became more simplified and standardized.
Were the different costumes the important feature?
A very important feature. You get, especially in France, you get all the regional costumes. You get the costumes that are devised by the great couturiers. They had a tremendous influence on the clothing that the dolls wore.
Another thing that should be pointed out, in 1885, I believe it was, Jumeau wrote an advertising booklet on the production, and in that he stated he was producing over 300 different new designs for dolls' clothes.
300 new designs in 1 year?
In 1 year.
Almost one a day?
Yes.
That's an ambitious project.
Yes. And he also said that for some finer garments, it would take a week to create one of these dresses.
As with any popular money-making venture, Jumeau soon had competitors making their own versions of the bébé. While many of the surviving dolls can be associated with a specific manufacturer, some still elude identification. Among Jumeau's competitors, and those most sought after by collectors today, were Steiner Burgoyne, Schmidt, Petit and Dumoutier, Rabbery and Delfeu, Mothereau, Bru, and the porcelain manufacturer Gaultier. Even with the name of a manufacturer identified, most of these dolls, unlike those of Jumeau, were the products of doll parts from a variety of independent small factories. Bulk supplies of heads, bodies, eyes, wigs, and clothes were made in these specialized independent workrooms, usually in separate geographic locations. The doll parts were then assembled in yet another workroom by an assembler firm that marketed the finished doll. Frequently, the quality of the doll was distinguished by slight, discrete details, like shadowing over the eyes, as seen in the Schmidt and Mothereau dolls. Jules Nicholas Steiner of Paris was Jumeau's strongest competitor. A gold medal winner in the 1889 Paris International Exposition, Steiner's dolls were appealing, as evident by this beguiling little gentleman. 8 inches tall, he was decorated with a replica in paper of the gold medal awarded Steiner in 1889. The miniature award medal was suspended from a brass pin stamped with the coat of arms of the city of Paris. Steiner dolls offered the widest variety of faces. To identify them, Steiner used the beginning of the alphabet, A, B, C, and so forth. For example, there were the round faces of the C series, and the slightly wistful expressions of the Steiner series marked A. Sometimes Steiner made dolls in association with J. Burgoyne. Examination of this size 4 or 28-inch tall Steiner Burgoyne doll with Series C pressed bisque head revealed distinguishing characteristics. All the Steiner body parts, including the ball joints, were made of papier-mâché, usually purple in color under the flesh color of the body paint. The stub fingers and slightly separated large toes were 2 more characteristics of the early Steiner products. This tiny 11-inch fully jointed girl doll has the impressed mark of A5 and the red stamp reading Le Parisien. The jointed hands of this doll have long fingers associated with later Steiner models. This little girl wore, like many of her surviving sisters, both her original Steiner store-bought chemise and a more substantial commercially made dress. A clothes horse, she has always worn the 2 outfits at the same time. While collectors often equate fine quality dolls with fine quality clothes, these 2 aspects were not always paired. This C-Series Steiner child was attired in a plain, inexpensive commercial chemise, but had remarkable bisque lower arms, including beautiful hands. Occasionally, the extremities of the bébés were of an unexpected material. In the instance of Petit and Dumoutier, painted metal hands were the distinguishing feature. Doll historians do not know who made these hands, but the porcelain factory of François Gautier, located in the suburbs of Paris, made the bisque for Petit and Dumoutier. Unlike Jumeau, most doll manufacturers did not make bisque parts. Rather, they owned the molds from which their proprietary parts were cast. Even Casimir Bru and his successors are suspected of having had their bisque parts made at first by François Gautier and later by Jumeau. Ever the inventor, Casimir Bru made adaptations of the bébé, but the firm also took the concept of earlier fashionable ladies and gave them childlike proportions. These Bru dolls had fully articulated wooden bodies in the manner of the composition models like this wood body. Others retained leather bodies. The majority of leather-bodied Bru bébés had either limbs of wood or the more commonly found bisque lower arms, as shown by this tall Bru Jaune doll. It also wore marked Bru leather shoes. François Gautier, whose mark FG in block letters, was another name associated with the dolls of the Golden Age. The Gautier name can only be connected with porcelain components, since the firm sold the unassembled porcelain parts. While the Gautier porcelain factory was located across the Bois de Vincennes from the Jumeau factory, dolls associated with Gautier were assembled and made elsewhere. An unidentified manufacturer used marked Gautier parts in conjunction with this gusseted kid bébé body. Even as the popularity of the fashionably female-shaped dolls known in the trade as poupée pot, leather doll, began to wane in the 1880s, Gautier continued to manufacture quantities of heads for these dolls. As long as these leather-bodied dolls were sold, Jumeau offered its version of a leather body. This doll carried the same Jumeau stamp across her back as was found on the composition bodies of Jumeau bébés. The simple cream wool frock which this doll has worn for over a century was typical of a girl's dress of about 1890. Worn under this dress was a Jumeau commercial chemise. The pink ribbon trim was identical to the ribbon braided into the doll's original blonde mohair wig. The 1883 catalog of Printemps department store in Paris revealed that the chemise's design was used on the Jumeau poupée pot. The decade's difference in date between the chemise and the dress suggests that either Jumeau used the same chemise design on his leather-bodied dolls for a long time, or that this particular doll survived wearing a dress from a later addition to its wardrobe. The simplicity of the Jumeau girl doll stood in contrast to the opulence of this Tête Jumeau, dressed to the nines and dripping with false lace and faux jewels. She stepped out of the manufacturer's showroom in this exact attire. Or consider this Jumeau lady with a kid body. Her face was familiar from its frequent utilization on French mechanical figures. But in this instance, the face represented a Queen of France, wife of the Renaissance King Francis I. Known in history as Eleanor of Austria, she was born a Habsburg princess, a sister of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. She was a granddaughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Spanish monarchs who sponsored Columbus's voyages of discovery to the New World. The doll was fabricated to honor the achievements of Spain on the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the Americas. She was displayed at the Columbian Exposition held in Chicago in 1893. While Queen Eleanor was part of a historical fashion parade of French queens in miniature, her soulful brown glass eyes surely reflected a Spanish ancestry. Even though her bisque head carried the typical déposée tête Jumeau red stamp, it probably was not Jumeau who had placed her on exhibition. Eleanor's accompanying card indicated that she was shown at the 1893 Columbian Exposition by Maison de Champs of 5 Rue de l'Echelle, Paris. Maison de Champs was a modiste's establishment. At this time, a modiste was someone who supplied but did not initiate the latest novelties in fashion. There was an almost universal fascination with design elements from the past, and clothing fashions provided one area for recreations. Elements of Eleanor's attire can be traced to a 1530 portrait by Guiguier, which was circulated in various engravings in the second half of the 19th century. Perhaps the grand neoclassical buildings of the Columbian Exposition suited the stature of Eleanor, but the exposition's setting in America's Midwest was more appropriate to homespun doll products of both foreign and domestic origins. Some of the dolls available on the American market were illustrated in Horseman's 1893 catalog that was released as a tie-in promotion with the Columbian Exposition. Among the more fanciful were worsted dolls, imported from Germany, including a harlequin. This worsted harlequin seems primitive after seeing Eleanor of Austria. Were worsted dolls popular in the United States?
Very popular, especially for the young child, because they could not be harmed as much with those as they could with a porcelain doll, of course, and they were a little more durable too, although I'm sure that a good many children would probably suck them, or as they were advertised, that they could use one of these as a hammer to strike at baby brother and it wouldn't hurt baby brother.
And then what would baby brother do? We don't want to get into that, do we?
No, but childhood is a very important part of the dolls, and one has to remember that most dolls were children's plaything, unlike Eleanor, who was an exhibition piece and just for show.
Who made worsted dolls?
Emil Wutzak of Germany, and he made them from the 1870s at least until the 19-teens period.
Was this worsted Santa Claus a favorite of children in the 1890s?
Yes, I would imagine so, with its topical theme of Christmas. However, they are not as popular as the other two dolls that you have there, namely the clown and the little girl. Those were advertised continuously from the 1880s to the 1916 period.
Was the worsted doll a completely soft doll, or did it have a skeleton?
It was completely soft, unlike the Wellington doll, which was patented in 1883. That, as I said, was patented with the skeleton construction for giving modeling to the head. A rather bizarre-looking patent, I must admit, and when you see the doll, you cannot believe that it has such a structure underneath.
In the United States, the creators and developers of dolls were women, mostly residents of the northeastern states. A variety of their cloth dolls bombarded the American market, beginning with the creations of Martha Wellington of Brookline, Massachusetts. Her dolls conveyed Yankee ingenuity. Previously, in 1883, she had patented the Wellington skeleton for doll construction. The Wellington skeleton seemed barely related to the chubby-cheeked child doll it was designed to support. Hand-painted features marked each Wellington doll with a distinct, rambunctious personality. The same streak of individuality ran through the missionary babies made from underwear stockinette, needle-sculpted and highlighted by Elmira, New York church ladies. Their leader was Julia Beecher, related by marriage to Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Following the creative designs of Julia Beecher and recycling used underwear stockinette, the missionary babies were finely detailed and had needle-sculpted ears, hands, belly button, and feet. These three-dimensional Beecher cloth dolls were not mass-produced, but required all handwork. Consequently, they were originally more expensive than imported French dolls with bisque heads. For instance, the Beecher sales card had a missionary baby, 16 to 18 inches tall, at $2 retail, or $1.50 if old silk jersey underwear were also tendered as a trade-in. The E.I. Horseman catalog of 1893 listed a wholesale price in the United States for a French 16-inch doll with bisque head, fully dressed, at $8.50 per dozen, 71 cents each at wholesale, or $1.42 at retail. A humble participant in the Columbian Exposition was Miss Emma Adams of Oswego, New York. In honor of the fair, she called her cloth creations Columbian dolls. With its two-dimensional cloth face, oil-painted for details, the Columbian doll was designed as an everyday plaything, an object that could be vigorously loved. This all-cloth doll appealed to young children because it was not in competition with them. Just like the average American child, the doll was meant to wear simple cotton dresses of white or patterned prints, not garments designed to show the latest fashion and styles from Paris. Another American cloth doll, but more substantial in appearance, was the oil-paint-encrusted stockinette-headed doll developed by the nurse, Martha Chase, of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Introduced around 1890, Chase dolls were usually blue-eyed and blonde. The standard doll varied only slightly over the years, as later editions, shown in these 1910 photos, were very similar to the original issue. With advancing textile technologies in North American mills, printed cloth became an ever cheaper commodity. One new avenue to entice buyers was to print dolls on cloth that could be cut out, sewn, and stuffed into shape. At the outset of an era that was to focus increasingly on the value of dolls to the development of young boys, an early patent for a cloth boy doll, dated January 31, 1893, by the Arnold Print Works, depicted a Columbian sailor. Also, Ida Gutzel of Ithaca, New York, designed two cloth cutout boy dolls and received a patent on August 15, 1893. Gutzel dolls were distinguished by a seam down the center of the face, a technique that was also used in Germany years later by Margareta Steiff for her felt dolls. The 1890s was a period almost unique in the history of dolls. Considerable attention was shown to the relationship of boys and dolls. Masculine characteristics were applied to dolls of all sizes, shapes, and materials, with special emphasis on military attributes. One of the most widely advertised men of war was this molded, carton-headed, impressionistically painted Frenchman. His entire body was made of papier-mâché, with selective painting for finishing details. His campaign battlegrounds existed in the advertising cards and catalog pages of major French department stores, such as the Louvre. Supporting the concept of dolls as acceptable toys for nursery-age boys was the proliferation of scientific literature on the value and influence of dolls on human development. Because of economic considerations such as artists' fees, mold fabrication expenses, and setup production costs, little consideration was paid by most manufacturers to portray distinct racial characteristics beyond pigmentation. Typical was this black bisque-headed doll bearing the label Paris Bébé. The doll was a standard French bébé, except it had been given a painted black complexion. Mass adaptation by ship and train were available for transcontinental and intercontinental travel for both the inquisitive tourist and the determined immigrant who passed through Ellis Island. For each group, dolls held a unique yet similar position. They were small visual reminders of people and places left behind. Stripped of their regionally distinctive dress, these dolls cannot be distinguished from the millions of other similar dolls created by many European manufacturers. One of the least colorful but most evocative representations of regional dress was this beautiful Simon and Halbig doll. Representing a married woman from Groningen in the Netherlands, she wore 3 layers of headwear: a frilled bobbin lace cap, a golden metal headpiece, which signified her matrimonial status, and a cotton skull cap. Underneath her headwear, she was a bald, shoulder-headed doll. The rest of her attire was simple, based on 18th century dress. A pre-plumed bodice, gathered skirt, and gingham apron. The cloth body was stamped Eekhof, Groningen. Another important doll type of the 1890s was the baby. Not the French bébés made famous by Jumeau, but a baby doll that the Germans excelled at producing. Not a newborn, these dolls frequently had solid bald heads which were covered with golden flowing tresses and bangs cut in a style known as Rembrandt. From the porcelain factory of Alt, Beck and Gottschalk of Nauendorf in Germany's Thuringian forest came this doll's head and elegantly molded arms. They have been united in a typical manner to a short-legged leather body produced by Wagner and Zetschek concern of nearby Ilmenau. By the 1890s, stylized dolly faces became the backbone of the German doll industry. These nearly identical faces were produced by many factories. They can be found attached to either ball-jointed composition or leather bodies. If these popular faces were analyzed, a little French ancestry would be detected. The Germans had plagiarized French models. Here is a quintessential German dolly-faced doll. The porcelain bisque-socket head was the product of one of the outstanding German manufacturers of fine dinner services, Simon and Halbig. Their factory was located in Grafenhain in Thuringia. The head was marked Handwerk Halbig to identify both its maker, Simon and Halbig, and the body manufacturer, Heinrich Handwerk. Also, the doll composition and wood ball-jointed body was stamped with the identifying mark of Heinrich Handwerk. In his factory located at Walterhausen, Thuringia, Heinrich Handwerk specialized in the machine production of composition doll bodies. Like her more expensive French siblings, she was readied for sale in an inexpensively constructed but eye-catching chemise. It was made of cheap-sized white cotton gauze bedecked with red satin ribbon. The flash of colorful ribbon was found only on the front. The marketing thought was that no customer would look at the back of a doll in its box on the store shelf. When advertised in her native Germany, dolls of this variety were often called Taufling, or baby in German. Thus, both the words Taufling and Bébé referred to generic dolls respectively made in Germany or France, representing a little child rather than a baby. While the French doll-making industry was located in the urban center of Paris, that of Germany was found in the wooded hills of central Germany in the region of Thuringia. The company of J.D. Kestner of Waltershausen and Ohrdruf, Thuringia, was, like its French counterpart Jumeau, practically the only integrated business in Germany which controlled the total production of its dolls. Most of the German names associated with doll making made either bodies or heads, not both. In the same area, Ohrdruf, Thuringia, Alt, Beck, and Gottschalk began to make some of the most popular porcelain parts for dolls, especially heads, which were widely distributed. The impressed mark on this bisque head, mold number 550, was made for the Philadelphia department store Gimbel Brothers by Simon and Halbig. Another old familiar name among those who made porcelain heads was Armand Marseille, whose French Huguenot family had migrated to Russia for a generation before settling in Sonneberg, Thuringia, at the beginning of this golden age of dolls. More recently, recognized German porcelain head makers include Hertel, Schwab & Company and Gebrüder Colemans. Long thought to be a French doll face, both from stylistic and quality points of view, the marks GK 28.17 now identify this doll with the Bavarian porcelain-making concern of Gebrüder Colemans. This composition head was made by the multifaceted German firm Cuno and Otto Dressel of Sonneberg. During this period, 1880 to 1915, the Dressel firm carried on business both as a manufacturer and as a Verleger. The German term Verleger, literally assembler and provider, best describes their functions. For instance, Dressel produced this composition head an ocean away from the Cincinnati, Ohio workroom of Philip Goldsmith, a German immigrant who fabricated the doll's body with its unique leather arms and boots. How did the latest French and German dolls and doll parts show up so rapidly in U.S. stores? Their market penetration was facilitated by the existence of a distribution network of wholesale importers, such as E.I. Horseman of New York City, Hayden and Chester of Providence, Rhode Island, and George Borgfeldt and Company of New York City. Interestingly, the growth of the Borgfeldt firm occurred during the period of the golden age of dolls. A German immigrant to the United States in 1853, George Borgfeldt worked as a bookkeeper for several importers of fancy goods and toys. Then in 1881, he founded his own importing firm, George Borgfeldt and Company, and took loft space in this building in New York City. His entrepreneurial concept was to expand the traditional role of the importer by contracting in advance with many small factories and craftsmen in cottage industries, primarily in Germany, for their entire annual production. The products were gathered in his warehouses in Germany. Samples were displayed in his showrooms in New York, Boston, Chicago, and St. Louis. Firm orders from U.S. stores were assembled in his European warehouses and shipped in bulk lots directly to the U.S. customers. Thus, U.S. buyers could visit a privately owned merchandise mart in a major U.S. city and contract for a variety of European merchandise with no payment risk until the goods were delivered to their stores. George Borgfeldt realized from the early stages the potential in the doll industry that was growing in Thuringia. In 1887, he opened a major warehouse facility at Sonneberg. Fred Cobb, a key associate, was assigned to manage the doll business. By 1890, one entire floor, about 20,000 square feet of display space in the Borgfeldt New York Sales Building was devoted to doll samples and supplies, some 8,000 different items, mostly from Thuringia. In response to the inroads made by the German firms, the major French doll makers, including the king of babies, Jumeau, in the pivotal year of 1899, joined a consortium known as the Société Française de Fabrication de Bébés et Jouets. It was known by its initials SFBJ and a variety of markings. Did the Jumeau factory continue to make dolls after its association with SFBJ in 1899?
It was one of the most important parts of the SFBJ.
And actually, by about 1910, the Jumeau firm itself ceased to exist. However, it was absorbed into the SFBJ concern.
Unfortunately, although it was a French concern with a French name, the head of it was a German.
Is that right?
Salomon Fleischmann.
Salomon Fleischmann.
That is
and when,
after 1900.
Yes, and when the war came, he had to leave France.
This is World War I.
This
Yes.
is World War I.
What influence did wars have in changing the course of doll history?
In the case of the SFBJ, unfortunately, because Mr. Fleischmann was a German, he was sent out of the country. And of course, the whole business of making the dolls fell due to lack of materials and lack of personnel.
Another thing that have happened was that since Germany had been the major source of dolls, the other countries had to develop their own interest. And then after the war, the types of materials that were used in doll manufacturing actually changed, and you got a different variety of dolls on the market that you hadn't had previously.
In all probability, the marked SFBJ dolly face head of this talking baby Jumeau with Mama Papa pull strings was the product of a German porcelain manufacturer. Dictates of fashion had little effect on traditional Jumeau chemises. For over 30 years, floral printed chemises initially clothed a bébé Jumeau. This particular doll, with traditionally identified Jumeau shoes, dates from about 1910, the year when SFBJ claimed to be producing 5 million Jumeaus. Fashions in doll design changed, just as fashions in other areas evolved. As a reaction to the stylized dolly faces, a group of German artists banded together in 1908 and developed, under the name Munich Art Dolls, a fascinating array of lifelike, sprightly children. Probably children of Munich, who on special occasions wore this distinctive black and gold uniform, inspired the dolls' heads. This movement, originated by Marion Cowlitz, included the artists Paul Vogelsanger, Joseph Wackerle, and Marie-Marc Schnur, who sculpted the heads. When put into production, the heads were made of a plaster-based composition. These realistic socket heads were strung on traditional ball-jointed composition bodies that were provided by Cuno and Otto Dressel of Sonneberg, Thuringia. Many of the dolls were dressed in costumes that reflected their Bavarian background. Simple peasant clothes like that of this boy with a Paul Vogelsanger head. Critical acclaim, beginning in 1908 for the creations of the Munich Art Doll Group, soon turned into a wave of reform in doll design. With the Puppen reform, dolly-faced dolls had new competition. Kids with character now permanently smiled, frowned, whistled, and winked. Heads, such as these sculptural examples from Gebrüder Hubach, were representative of the new fashion. To many, the Hubach range of character faces was the most adventuresome and artistically satisfying. What could be more expressive than this coquette making eyes at her whistling boyfriend? Even when adaptations, such as changing painted eyes to glass, were made in the production of a head, characterization was not lost. This pouty-faced Gebrüder Hubach baby with the impressed mold number 6969 had sleeping glass eyes. Heads with this same Hubach mold number, 6969, were also created with molded intaglio eyes, like this very sensitive-appearing child. The other German doll manufacturer most closely identified with character-faced dolls was Kammer Reinhardt. Unlike Gebrüder Hubach, who made bisque heads, Kammer Reinhardt owned molds and arranged with Simon and Halbig for the production of the actual porcelain parts. One of Kammer Reinhardt's most popular character heads, introduced in 1909, was mold number 114. Versions of the mold had either painted eyes or glass eyes. Changes in features, such as eyes or hair treatment, also changed a particular doll's appearance. Interestingly, both of these mold number 114 dolls were known in the American market as royal dolls. Kammer Reinhardt could have also used the term Mein Liebling, which translates as my darling, for their line of character dolls. Kammer Reinhardt's first character doll was a realistic, fully proportioned baby with limbs modeled in naturalistic positions, even down to a separated big toe. Given the trade name Baby, the doll was introduced in 1909, a year after the first Munich art dolls. The mass-produced head of this doll, mold number 100, was taken from a model sculpted by the Berlin artist Arthur Lewin Funk. Baby was immediately popular with both mothers and mothers-to-be. Kammer Reinhardt's Baby started a bent-limb baby population explosion. Manufacturers rushed into production both sweet and ugly babies, cute and cantankerous ones. Swain and Company made 2 small babies. Alt, Beck, and Gottschalk's mold number 1319 was another version. A baby from Gebrüder Hubach had a molded white bonnet decorated with pink and green decal roses. Kestner's popular 211 was in striped rompers. This glass-eyed baby by Franz Schmidt had mold number 1271. A tiny baby with mold number 201 was made by Katterfelder Puppenfabrik. Looming above was the scowling face of a baby. This two-face or Janus-style head was made by Hertel Schwab and Company of Stutzhaus near Ohrdruf for Clay and Hahn of Ohrdruf, Thuringia. Being a baby is not always so bad, as the happier, smiling side of this head reveals. The mark impression of Simon and Halbig on character dolls was generally found in conjunction with another doll maker, usually that of Kammer Reinhardt. With a rare and hauntingly beautiful character face, this doll's head from Simon and Halbig carried only a double impression of the Simon and Halbig Porcelain Company's marks and the Roman numerals IV. As serene and haunting as the previous doll was, this large-eyed, impish Kestner mold, number 221, was almost a caricature of a character doll. Its large eyes and crescent-shaped mouth were derived from the works of popular children's illustrators such as Grace Drayton and Rose O'Neill. A resident of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Grace Drayton was also known by her artist name, Grace Wiedersheim. A native of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Rose O'Neill designed the Cupid doll. Most collectors associate the name of Armand Marseille with prototypical dolly-faced dolls, yet this company also distributed its share of engaging character children, like this impish toddler impressed with the name mark Fanny in the bisque of her head. Research has disclosed that her face was copied from a well-known Baroque period bust of a child by the Flemish sculptor François Duquesnoy, 1595 to 1646. So inspiring was this ideal child that Cata Cruz, a retired actress, copied a plaster model to design the head of her first commercial doll in 1910. Cata Cruz said that she was attracted by its perfect childlike expressions. The head and body were cut out of muslin, sewn together, filled with cotton or deer hair, and then detailed with oil paint. Produced initially in her Berlin home and after 1912 in a cottage workshop at Bad Kösen, Germany, the early orders for this molded cloth play doll, the Cruz doll number 1, were sold in America. The Cata Cruz dolls were featured in the FAO Schwartz catalog of 1915. Not all the distinguished dolls were gold prize winners at international expositions, but these displays helped the transatlantic flow of design ideas. An example of the transatlantic similarity of design ideas was the cloth face with a center seam. It had been used first in America by Ida Gutzel. Later, in the early 1900s, Margarete Steiff, working in her factory at Grengen, Germany, selected felt as the material to make dolls. She also began employing a felt face with a center seam for her character dolls, illustrated here by a Bavarian boy doll 10½ inches tall. Another model of the Bavarian boy stood almost 2 feet tall. Even though this large Steiff boy doll was not a gold medal winner, it did not diminish the devotion that a little girl from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Catherine Emily Smith, lavished on her Steiff doll, which she christened George von Stromfeder. He was her companion and playmate when she played American Indian princess. She sent him on flag-planting conquests of snowy peaks and encouraged his exploration forays by sled. Like Anstis McDuffie of a generation before, Catherine Smith had a large cosmopolitan doll family. In 1915, 18 family members surrounded the matriarch, and in the midst of this cornucopia of dolls of the Golden Age stood George. The outbreak of World War I abruptly ended the Golden Age of dolls. In the United States, foreign imports from continental Europe were disrupted by the British blockade and a national embargo. In Germany and France, the prolonged fighting devastated all aspects of the doll manufacturing industry. But for more than a generation of children during the period of 1880 to 1915, the experiences of growing up had been shared with some very special friends in miniature. Experiences like enjoying a picnic in a secret garden, playing the game called drills, sledding in the first snow of winter, teaching little pupils in school, reciting morning prayers, and remembering those important evening prayers. Dorothy, how did you acquire this Steiff Bavarian boy doll, George von Stromfeder?
Actually, he was given to my daughters by a close friend of mine. It had been her doll when she was a little girl. She's the same age as I am.
Dorothy, you were born in 1909, toward the end of the golden age of dolls. What did your play dolls mean to you then?
They meant a great deal to me. I was always extremely fond of my dolls. And I was fortunate in having friends who also loved their dolls. We didn't have a lot of other occupations like you have today. And dolls and playing with dolls were a very important part of our life.
Did you have favorite childhood dolls?
Well, I would say that probably this was my favorite. This was the oldest doll that is, I received her first. And for that reason, why I think she was especially nice. And she would go away each Christmas and get a new outfit. Now, if you'll notice that her dress and the one in the picture over here
Yes.
are identical. Mother, each Christmas, would give her a new outfit, and it happened that I had a dress that I particularly liked, and so Mother made a dress for Goldie that matched it.
Yes, I think that's wonderful. Now the question is, what do they mean to you now?
Well, of course, the dolls have brought the three Colemans together because of our mutual interest and the fact that we've been able to go to many places and meet many fascinating people all over the world who also are interested in the antique dolls.
Thank you, Dorothy Coleman and Evelyn Jane Coleman, for sharing information on these wonderful dolls and their background. You've helped us understand why they were truly dolls of the Golden Age. Who is your favorite American doll artist of this period?
I would say that possibly Emma Adams, who of Albany, New York, who made a cloth doll, which was a very attractive doll, and she actually designed that.
Another important one is the Beecher dolls that were made as fundraising for missionary work.
Were there any problems in writing Volume 2, Dorothy?
Actually, we have so much material that we could even write a third volume. It's not lack of material, it's lack of time to write the volumes that we need.